All right, all right. Welcome into another edition of the Green Teamers podcast. Sunday night, little late night live reaction to the Celtics win over the Orlando Magic, splitting down in Orlando after an ugly game on Friday night. A much better team effort tonight, kind of an all-around better effort. We'll get into the nitty-gritty in a little bit, but Jake, your main takeaways from the Celtics win tonight over the Magic.
Yeah, I think main takeaway has got to be. I mean, Anthony Simons that first half was incredible. I think Granny had a stat on the broadcast that he had. I think him and White combined for 38 of the Celtics' first half points. The two of them were great, and it was nice to see that from White because he's been struggling as of late, or really since the start of the season. So from that perspective, it was good to see that. Now, obviously, Simons kind of trailed off toward the second half. I believe he was scoreless for most of that second half, if not all of it. And White, he actually was able to continue that, so you saw him kind of come together. And then the cherry on top, I thought, from offensively, was the fact that Jaylen Brown was able to come alive in that later on in the game. You saw in the third quarter, second quarter, he was kind of out of it. You didn't see a lot of scoring from him. And then all of a sudden, it was like a light switch went off, and he was able to just go out and close out the Magic and secure the Celtics a win. And that's what you see from a number one option. When Jaylen Brown wants to be this, and we've talked about this a lot this preseason, is that how Jaylen Brown wants to be that number one option. The Celtics are seeing if he can do that. That's the type of thing that number one options do. And it was great to see that from Brown as this narrative and kind of storyline develops throughout the rest of the season.
Yeah, I would agree 100%. I think Simons, obviously, you mentioned his first half, 25 points in the second quarter, unbelievable shooting. He was Inferno, as Grandy refers to him, I believe, when he catches fire. And I'm glad you brought up Derek White, too, a guy who we've maybe other than Jaylen Brown, the guy we've talked about the most on this podcast, just because I think he is a fascinating player this year, stepping into that number two role, a lot more responsibility on Derek White. And I'm with you. I think this was a step in the right direction for Derek White. Especially because he was everywhere defensively, steals in the backcourt, like just being a pest, getting his hands in plays. Like that's the Derek White that we need to see, the Celtics need to see on a nightly basis if they're going to contend. And you mentioned Jaylen Brown. I don't want to say frustrated because he's been so good this year, but not a very efficient Jaylen Brown night. What was he? I think 10 for 24 tonight. So not super efficient, but like you said, he started driving more later in the game. And I think another thing too, and we'll get into obviously Jordan Walsh and Luka Garza in a minute or two, but just on your overall takeaways from the game, one thing that really stood out to me was how hard they were working to get their shots in this game. Instead of they were still taking threes and even settling for threes in some instances, but it felt like they were working much harder to get open threes and they were driving more mid-range looks. Luka Garza was, crushing it inside. Keita with another okay game, even though he fouls out. But I really liked how hard they worked to get to their spots tonight. Just the offense seemed more energized, more grit, more fight. I don't know if that's just Ugo and Jordan Walsh and a guy like Garza being out there more, and that's just how they're forced to play because that's who they are as players. But did you see anything different stylistically tonight from the Celtics that stood out to you?
I think the biggest thing stylistically with the rotation was that Keita didn't have a great night. He actually fouled out through the game, and Garza stepped in into a larger role, and you saw him actually take over for a period of time offensively. I think stylistically, they seemed like it felt like they were attacking more. I was kind of had a unique perspective on the game because I was cutting up. I was doing the board with our good friend Matthew Stenberg and cutting highlights and getting everyone all on the air and going to in and out commercial. And one thing that I kind of noticed was it was always like Garza layup. And Garza was kind of consistently popping up in our highlight feed for a while. And on top of that, when you were looking at the NBA play-by-play, it was a lot of Brown pull-up, White jumper, Peyton Pritchard jumper, like whoever it was. You didn't see a lot of threes. You did see some three-pointers. Took 33 of them, 13 of 33 on the night. But you're okay with them shooting that many threes when you hit 13 of them. That's 39%. Anybody would take that. 39% is a good mark. So although they still took a good amount of three-pointers, you're not going to get on them for taking too many three-pointers because they hit 13 of them. And I think that's the part that gets lost in a lot of this discussion with how the Celtics are stylistically is it's okay if the Celtics take a lot of threes if they're making them. at a somewhat consistent rate. Obviously, you're not going to shoot 50% from three. That's outlandish to even throw that out there. But is it too much to ask you to shoot 35%, 39%? That should not be a demanding task for a team like this to go out and get on a nightly basis. So that to me was something that stood out, is that yes, they still took a good amount of threes, but they were hitting them at a somewhat consistent rate. And then of course, Luka Garza was playing great and he was providing a post presence. And this kind of goes back, Skaz, to what I was talking to you about this, and I think Joe Friday night, is everyone's talking about Keita and how his plus minus numbers are so great. And he has been playing really well through the start of the season, but maybe it's not that Keita is that good of a player. Maybe it's the fact the Celtics are benefiting by actually having a big man on the floor with them. And again, I'm not trying to take away from Keita and his performance, because he's been very good at the start of this season. But just keep that in mind as we see, like, what if the next few games it could be Chris Boucher that steps up, or Tillman, and you're starting to notice a trend with some of these guys. Now, Boucher and Tillman, they didn't play tonight. They were coaches, DMPs. But tonight was Luka Garza. Maybe the next game it's Keita again. Maybe it's Garza again. Who knows? But just keep that in mind as we talk about what this team needs and how the lineup is. It really could come down to the fact that they are struggling without a true big man presence.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still waiting for the Chris Boucher game. I'm not going to hold my breath.
It might not happen, and that's okay if it doesn't.
I'm not going to hold my breath on that one. We'll wait and see. But just an interesting way to look at that as well. I think Keita has been, a big bright spot. You mentioned the plus minus. I think it also kind of signifies the fall off in their roster depth and the level of big men that they have, that after Keita's out, it really does just absolutely fall off a cliff. So they need another NBA big. Garza, maybe he can grow into that. We'll see. It's still very early. He's, athletically limited, but he's an unbelievably intelligent. You watch him. If you watch him in college, like, he knows where to be. His body can't always get him in the right spot. He doesn't have the, he's not a pure scorer, but he's a efficient scorer. 7 of 8 tonight. Like, he's going to do things how he should, but it's just, is it effective in the NBA? We don't know, because he's limited. So that's kind of a lot of the roster right now. And another thing for me tonight, Peyton Pritchard, you mentioned they take 33 threes, which I think they go from 51 night to 33 the next. So it's like, who are they? What are they? Yeah, exactly. And I think it is a little matchup dependent. The Magic are a long team. They defend the 3-point shot very well. We know that from the playoffs last year. And I want to give Missoula credit for changing that up, for not settling for a million 3-pointers. But some small concerns coming out of this game. Peyton Pritchard still not the Peyton Pritchard we all expect, not the Peyton Pritchard the Celtics certainly expect or need on a nightly basis. 5 points tonight, 2 of 8 from the field. That's just not good enough. And when Anthony Simons is having nights like this, I think it kind of pushes that narrative, pushes that agenda that maybe Simon should be the starter and Peyton Pritchard can maximize his ability out of that, sixth man role. I just think everybody kind of fits better. You have a guy like Minot who doesn't score tonight, but still finds a way to impact the game. I think he's kind of solidified his spot in the rotation. So I wonder what we see with Anthony Simons going forward after a night like tonight.
Yeah, no, that's a great question and a great point by you. I think it's interesting with Pritchard because if you go by and you look at his numbers for the last few games, 18 points against Utah, 18 points against Washington, and then Friday night, 27 points, 5 of 8 from 3-point land, and 8 of 16 from the field as a whole. Those are numbers that you want to see from Pritchard, right? That's a monster performance. He also had 4 assists in that game, really kind of found his rhythm, it felt like, in that. And tonight, he was doing a good job as a ball distributor. He had 5 assists. He grabbed 5 boards as well. But as you mentioned, the 5 points and 2 of 8 from the field, that's not good. And that's something the Celtics need to address and fix. I'm hesitant to say that they need to pull him from the starting lineup because that can mess with the player's confidence a lot. And I don't think you want to do that with Pritchard. What maybe should have happened is, and this could be a good second guess, is maybe Pritchard should have stayed as the 6th man at the start of the season. Maybe that would have been some feelings hurt and you had to smooth over that. But that's kind of your job, and as a head coach, Joe Mazzulla, I would say. And that's something that we think that's a Mazzulla strength, is that Mazzulla can handle those personalities and some of those feelings based on what he did the last few seasons with the championship team and contending for an NBA championship. So For me, I look at this and I say, I don't know if I'm ready to pull Pritchard out of the starting line to put Simmons in. Simmons is also super ball dominant, and I think you saw it tonight. He did a better job with the second unit and coming off the bench because he's so ball dominant and he demands so many shots and so many touches. He was spectacular in that first half. He went cold in the second half, but that's also kind of who Simons is. Simons is going to be a streaky player at times. He's going to be a volume shooter. He needs to get his touches. And I just would be hesitant to move him into the starting lineup, especially considering is that who do you want to get a lot of touches? Jaylen Brown. Jaylen Brown's touches will be minimized and be taken away from to suffice Simons's opportunities. So I would be hesitant to do that. I know a lot of people are talking about it, and maybe that's an option down the road, but I'm not ready to pull the trigger on that yet.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a lot of great points there. I think Pritchard's a guy that you can make the sixth man again. I don't think I know he was sixth man of the year, so maybe I'm wrong, but I think he would accept the role. Like I think he wants to win, but maybe he does view himself as kind of a veteran in that locker room. But you can't be worried about hurting Peyton Pritchard's feelings if you're Joe Mazzulla. Like, no offense to Peyton Pritchard, but this is the NBA. If you're better off the bench, you're better off the bench. And who says Anthony Simons is even better as a starter? Like you said, he is the definition of a streaky volume scorer in this league. That's what he does. He scores in bunches, and then he goes ice cold. Not really interested in defense, even though I would say he's been better in limited stretches this year. So I think there's still some question marks with the roster and the rotation, certainly. And on a night like tonight, a guy like Luka Garza has a big imprint, and then Ugo Gonzalez and Jordan Walsh continue to impact games. And Jordan Walsh is a guy fans have been hard on, kind of expected more. It's his third year in the league, and not that he had 25 points or anything like that tonight, and Ugo Gonzalez wasn't lighting it up either. But Ugo Gonzalez, team high plus 19, I believe, just in there making impact plays after impact plays. He's a disruptor. He knows where to be. And Jordan Walsh, kind of the same thing. He's long. He gets in the passing lanes. He's disruptive. And he hits, a three at the start of the fourth quarter, early in the fourth, to give them a little cushion. And then he hits the biggest shot of his life. That sounds like hyperbole, but I don't think it is. Like, I think that may be the biggest shot of Jordan Walsh's life late in the fourth quarter. And I want to give Jaylen Brown and Peyton Pritchard credit on that play, because that was the game-winning play. That did seal the deal with whatever it was, 8 seconds left, 6 seconds left. And in years past, even this year, maybe earlier in the season, like, that's one where you see Jaylen Brown go hero ball. And Peyton Pritchard's a guy who can be a little bit of a ball hog at times. Like, he dribbles, 15 times in a row and then chucks in some situations. So to see Jaylen Brown and Peyton Pritchard make the right read there, and for Peyton Pritchard especially, to trust his teammate, a younger, not nearly as good of a shooter, Jordan Walsh, to kind of almost defer to him in that moment. I think that says a lot about this team, the belief, hey, we need everybody. It can't be Peyton Pritchard and Jaylen Brown on a nightly basis. It's not going to work if it is. And I thought tonight was a perfect encapsulation of that, where everybody pitched in, everybody looked good, just doing the small things, good things consistently. That's what the Celtics team needs on a nightly basis if they're going to win games. And the tank is over. They're not tanking. They're not going to be a bottom barrel team in the league. Their roster isn't spectacular, but if Derek White can become the Derek White that we expect, Peyton Pritchard's not going to struggle like this forever. And guys like Luka Garza, Ugo Gonzalez, Jordan Walsh, Josh Minot, Anthony Simons, they're proving they can be rotation pieces in the league. The tank isn't happening was kind of one of my takeaways too. I don't know if that's too much of a knee-jerk reaction, but I don't know how you've been feeling about the tank conversation and the young guys kind of stepping up over the last week.
Well, I mean, I've always been against the tank narrative or discussion point. Like, this team should be too good to stink, and too good to tank. It's just the way it should be. This is a team that still has core pieces from a championship team from 2 years ago, and I know the DNA, and you're missing Jason Tatum, and that makes this team a lot different. And the Celtics are addressing that and are working through that. But if you have Jaylen Brown, Derek White, Peyton Pritchard, who, by the way, many Celtics fans have clamored as being a starter on most NBA teams. If you have those guys, you should be able. I know Scott is shaking his head for the people listening on the podcast. I'm
No,
glad he's
yeah.
owning up to that. But
I've never been a Peyton Pritchard as a starter or an all star, which was some takes around. And I like Peyton Pritchard. He's a very good player, but he has been, as a lot of Celtics do, he's been a little
little
overhyped
hyped,
by the fan
up.
base. Yeah, a
The green
little bit,
teamers have hyped him
little
up
bit,
just a tad bit.
just a tad.
But this team has the pieces to be better than a tanking team, and not to mention, like, you don't want to go and tank in the draft. The Celtics organization didn't have to do that since they won the championship in 2008. They've never had to do that since then. The one time that they did somewhat tank, they were immediately good the next season, and then you had Brooklyn do your tanking for you. So you don't want to play. And look where Brooklyn is. They had, they're obviously came out on top in some way because they got Durant and Kyrie together, and they were making some noise in the playoffs through that. But is Brooklyn a good team right now? Is that an organization that scares you? No, it's not. So do you want to be the Brooklyn Nets, or do you want to be the Boston Celtics, who try and build and reload and not rebuild? I think you'd rather be the Celtics or Oklahoma City. Oklahoma City has some really bad years, but you could always look at them and say they're making progress. They're not just tanking. They're not just sucking. You can see the steps being built to become a better team and a better organization, and now they're at the top of the top right now, and everyone wants to be them.
Yeah, I think it's some great points as well. The Boston Celtics are not a team that really tanks. Their most effective tanking ever, like you mentioned, probably the line of the night was done by the Brooklyn Nets. Like, they're the ones who tanked for you. That wasn't even you that pulled off the really successful tank. I think the Celtics tank ended with Marcus Smart, if I'm remembering correctly. Some fans will say that was a successful tank. Some fans will say you didn't win until he was traded. So there's plenty of different ways to look at it. I'm, out on tanking. I know the class is loaded with DeBonsa and Boozer and Kennedy, or I can't even remember the other kid's name, but there's some studs coming out next year. But I think the more important thing for this Celtics team is Jaylen Brown, Derek White, and Peyton Pritchard kind of, really solidify themselves. Not that Jaylen Brown's solidified. Finals MVP, he doesn't have to do anything. But he's proving he can be a number one, and whether he needs to prove that to himself or the rest of the league, he's doing that. So I think that's a good thing. And it's just these other guys proving basically this whole year is a tryout for should you be on the roster next year when Jason Tatum is fully healthy. Sounds maybe a little harsh to guys like Garza and Simons and stuff like that, but to me, that's what this season is. Are you a valuable enough piece that when Jason Tatum is here, you still deserve rotation minutes? Can you prove that? Josh Minott is a guy who I think is doing that. He seems like a guy that can run and play with Tatum and Brown, that could be athletic out there with Derek White, push the floor, play good defense. He's certainly not an offensive weapon yet, but that's what I'm looking for out of this team. Hugo Gonzalez seems to be another guy that can do that. So, an up and down week for the Celtics. They have a horrible loss on Monday to the Jazz, a team they should not lose to. Kind of a lot of their bad habits coming true in that game. Then they beat the Wizards, a team that, they blow out the Wizards, as they should do. That's the Celtics we more expect. You got something on that, Jake?
Yeah, so by the way, if you want to tank, the Wizards are currently in the best odds right now with the Brooklyn Nets, both at 1-9 records. So that's the team you're competing loosely for the top number one spot. That's who you're competing against, and they blew the doors off them.
Yeah, you would have to bench like 4 guys to lose to the Wizards, it feels like right now. Like, that's how bad the Wizards are. So you're not in that class, and you shouldn't be in that class. Like, you're just not there. Joe Mazzulla is not going to let this team be there. Celtics ownership, management, that Jaylen Brown, Derek White, that's not who they are. That's not what they're going to do. And I'm in for that. So, and then you lose to the Magic in kind of a grimy game the other night. You get out hustled, outworked, and you bounce back tonight. And I think we're going to see a lot of that this year, where it's not going to be pretty. It's going to be ugly. But that's the Celtics team. They're not overly talented, but in a weak Eastern Conference, they're certainly going to hang around, and that's what they've been doing so far.
I think the worst part about that Friday night game was exactly how you put it. They were out hustled. The Celtics team should never be out hustled. Like, last year, they kind of had the built-in excuse on a game like that where, yeah, first game traveling, you played Washington Wednesday night, so you really only had a day off, but you were good enough to say, nah, that game we just didn't have it. This team's not good enough to do that because you need to win those games. And for anyone who cares about the NBA Cup, that's a game that's going to haunt you in the NBA Cup. Not that I think a lot of people care about it, but, it was an NBA Cup game. So I think for this team moving forward is that's something you need to hang your hat on. There's going to be games where you get out-talented. And if you get out-talented, so be it. That is what it is. But you should never, ever, ever be outworked as this season goes on, because you're not talented enough to do that. And that's the one thing that you can control. You got to control the controllables, not to give you a coaching cliche,
There you
but
go.
that's the truth. The Celtics have to not be the team to say, oh, yeah, we got outworked tonight. That's okay. That's not okay. That shouldn't be acceptable for this team.
That was some good Mike Tomlin speak right there, if I've ever heard it. But yeah, I think we've both been out on the tank since the beginning of the season. But I think just seeing them play in this point in the season, like we both didn't want them to tank. We both didn't think they were going to be a tank team, and now you see them in action over the course of the first couple weeks of the season, and they're too good to tank. I think the tank was always kind of a stupid idea for this team. They just weren't bad enough. Like if Jaylen Brown was also hurt, fine, different argument. We can do the tank talk, but that's not where this team is at. This team is going to be a fringe playoff team, and not that I want them to go out and add, huge pieces or anything at the deadline. I don't think that would be a good idea, but they're an interesting team. They have pieces that have shown that they deserve different, spots in the league. And Simons is a guy where when we get to the trade deadline, are they going to be trading Simons? Are fans going to be like, no, they should push for an 8-7 seed? That's the conversation I'm interested to see which way it goes, because going into the season, sell everybody, kind of, not everybody, but you know what I mean. Simons, any other piece, Boucher, if he gave you something out of the start of the season, like guys you can move at the deadline for future assets. I was all in on that. I still believe I'm in that camp, but I'll be interested to see where they're at the trade deadline, and what the kind of pulse of the fan base is at that time. If Simons is still scoring, 18 to 24 a night or something like that, he could be a valuable piece for a contender that needs to score. Even a team like the Magic, you watch the Magic play, and they went out and got Desmond Bane, and he's been not good by all accounts. If you read anything, if you watch the Magic, certainly if you look at the box score, he's been kind of a disappointment there. So Simons is a piece that could be valuable around the league. Now we're doing trade deadline talk already, but I think this is a team that needs to be looked at with a big picture lens, because Jason Tatum is still waiting in the wings. So if they're hanging around, maybe the talk is add at the deadline. And I think games like this just kind of solidify that they are an interesting team. They're not going to be the Bruins and rip off 6 in a row and do go up to Toronto and win a game there. But I'm interested in this Celtics team. I think they're fascinating. I think Luka Garza is a guy that people had high hopes for and kind of didn't deliver. And also, it's just the DNP thing too is something that we've talked about. Tillman with another DNP tonight. Chris Boucher with another DNP. Baylor Shireman has been a guy where they went to him early the other night, then you don't see much of him. Jake, Chris Boucher's DNPs feel like wins. I know that's harsh. I know that's a little over the top, but when Chris Boucher doesn't play, it feels like we're saying, hey, Celtics just won again or something like that. And he was supposed to be a guy that came into this team, fit the offense, shot threes, kind of a soft big man. You're like, oh, he fits right in here. And they've gotten nothing out of him. And when he doesn't play, you're like, well, Garza gave you some good minutes. Cada continues to ascend. So what is the Chris Boucher experience right now?
The Chris Boucher experience has been quite interesting. I mean, I think you put it pretty well there. That anytime he doesn't play is probably a good sign for the Celtics, which is dumb because should be a good player on paper. You look at him, like you said, 6'8" power forward, journeyman in the league. He was with Golden State from 17 to 18. He only played a game that season, but was on a team that was contending for championships. Was a part of that Raptors team the last few years, even with Kawhi, and when they went to the finals. He should be a guy who you can rely on as not only as a player, but also someone who can provide locker room experience to some of these guys. Your Luka Garzas, your Simons, who's been in the league for a little bit less of time, but similar time frame, but hasn't had that success like Boucher has had. So yeah, I would think that he's a guy that you could rely on. At this point, though, this is who he is. He's a guy who will give you a little bit of production at maybe certain moments, but not someone you can rely on consistently to do that. And it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier, Skaz, is that this Celtics roster is a gamble. That's a guy you took a gamble on. And maybe that's one of the ones that you thought was going to pan out because everything on paper kind of pointed in that direction. He's played 50 games in Toronto the last 2 seasons. He was never really a starter. He's only started 23 games in his entire career, but played in 413 games. I mean, that's pretty ridiculous. Just a split right there. But he's not providing the same production that we thought that he was going to provide. He's only averaging 2.5 points per game. That's down from 10 points last year. He's also only averaging, his blocks are up a little bit, but rebounding 1.7 boards a game. Come on, you grab 5 boards in your career. You got to provide more for that for the Celtics team. And this is the kind of player that the Celtics were relying on to be good, and it's hurting them tremendously that he isn't providing the same stat line that he should be providing for this team.
100%. Couldn't agree more. It's just one of those things where this team was already behind the 8 ball with the roster they had going into the year. We're just talking about the roster on paper. You know, the expectations of who these guys were supposed to be. Chris Boucher was a sneaky big part of that. And him being as bad as he's been, and Baylor Scheinman being a non-factor, and Xavier Tillman really not progressing, you know, a guy that's 25, 26 years old, kind of seems like he's reached his, you know, limited peak as to what he is in this league, a minimal rotation big who is a DNP in certain matchups. And you look at that on paper and you say, well, if this team's going to get nothing out of Shireman, Boucher, Tillman, like they're in a tough spot. And Peyton Pritchard struggling to shoot. Derek White had a rough stretch to start the season, still kind of fighting his way out of it. You'd say they'd be, you know, one of the worst teams in the league, and I think they're 11th in the East, and not that that's any great shakes, but I think it is kind of show something that they found something in these other, you know, ancillary pieces in the Garzas and the Hugos and Jordan Walsh kind of finding a little niche here and there. So those can all be, you know, good things going forward. And, you know, they get the 76ers this week, a team they've already played a couple times and had wins and losses against. That should be an interesting one. The Grizzlies, I'm interested to see that matchup. Kind of a bigger team. Who knows what's going on with Ja down there? Who knows what's going on in Memphis anyways? The weird coach situation over the last year.
It's weird.
Just very bizarre. And then they play the Clippers next Sunday. So kind of a light week for the Celtics, only 3 games, which is, I think, a good thing. Maybe they can get some practice work in, kind of figure out the rotations a little bit more. I still think there's mixing and matching going on there. And who knows what the Clippers are going to look like on Sunday, a team that starts different lineups all the time because of injury. And if it's a back-to-back, you won't see Kawhi or anything like that. So my final thoughts on the Celtics are an okay week, a horrible loss to the Jazz, a good win against a win that they should get against the Wizards. And then I wanted them to split with Orlando, and 2 games down in Orlando, and they end up splitting. So 1 bad loss, two good wins. That's kind of who this team is right now. That's going to be most of their week. So a decent week for the Celtics, and hopefully, you know, they go 2-1 over these next 3 games, and we'll see what happens. Jake, your final thoughts?
I would just say final thoughts, kind of looking ahead, is you're playing teams that are similar to you. The Clippers, Memphis, 76ers, these are all teams who are going to be vying for a play-in tournament spot, maybe get above that play-in tournament line if you're like a Philadelphia or even a Celtics team. That's what the Celtics should be aiming for. So this is the week where you can see them really compete against teams around their same caliber. You don't have a team like Houston on your schedule, so you don't have to worry about getting blown out by a team that's just much better than you, quite frankly. And I would also watch the back-to-back on Tuesday into Wednesday, because they've split every back-to-back they played on this year. This would be interesting to see if it's better when they're playing the first one on the road and coming home. Are they able to get their legs underneath them a little bit better than maybe what they have in previous games? One of those back-to-back was against Houston, so kind of get to give it a little bit of an excuse because Houston's just that much better. But those are the things I'd watch for. You're facing talent that's similar to you and teams that are going to be vying for the same postseason position that you're looking for, and also the back-to-back. How do you perform with the back-to-back? Can you actually get 2 wins there and not split?
Yeah, I think that's some great points. And just one last thing from me is I'd be very interested how they come out Sunday against the Clippers after a couple of days off in a back-to-back. If there are changes, you know, stylistically, rotations, matchup-wise, that's what I'll be looking for on Sunday. So, Jake, thank you so much. Another great week of green teaming. You doing this from the studio late on a Sunday night. We much appreciated. The man is working hard, doing everything for the Celtics, producing the games, cutting highlights, doing the podcast. The Jake Seymour extraordinaire back there. So thank you to Jake. This will be up on YouTube. People in the chat now. We got one guy saying, get the 7'9" kid from Florida. Olivier Roux, I believe is his name. He's not very good, but he is very tall, so maybe that is something the Celtics could need. Jake, thanks so much.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Of course, man. Anytime. We'll be back next week. I don't know what we'll hammer out the schedule during the week, but hopefully maybe Sunday a little earlier after the Clippers game, but we'll see what happens. So another happy week of green teaming, as James Stewart once said. So we'll be back. Thanks for tuning in.